The scent of vintage Chanel and expensive cigars hung heavy in the air of the Parisian ballroom, a stifling fog that Germaine Desforges navigated with the precision of a clockmaker. At 32, she was the ghost that kept the gears of the elite turning, straightening the silk ties of men who owned continents and memorizing the allergies of women who wore small fortunes around their necks. Tonight was the Equinox Gala. Everything was in its place. The crystal chandeliers vibrated with the low hum of 500 voices. The champagne was exactly 45 degrees, and the security detail was invisible. Germaine adjusted her earpiece, her heels clicking a steady, rhythmic beat against the polished marble as she moved toward the terrace. Order was her religion. Silence was her sanctuary. She was fumbling with a guest's misplaced diamond cufflink near the heavy velvet curtains of the north balcony when the world of order ended. A metallic click, cold, final. Then a low, wet thud. Germaine's blood turned to liquid nitrogen. The sounds were coming from just inches away, muffled by the heavy drapes but unmistakable. She pressed herself into the shadows of the stone pillar, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard she was certain the guests on the other side would hear the rhythm of her terror. Through the sliver of the curtain, she saw a silhouette. The man didn't look like a murderer. He looked like a god carved from obsidian and spite. He wiped a single droplet of blood from his jaw with a silk handkerchief that cost more than Germaine's monthly rent. Then he turned. Even through the darkness, Germaine felt his gaze, a predator sensing a tremor in the grass. She ran. Her heels, once the instruments of her professional poise, now skidded on the marble as she sprinted toward the service corridor. She needed a lock, a barrier. She burst into the silver polishing room and through the deadbolt, her breath coming in ragged gasps that tasted of ozone and fear. Then the lights went out. In the absolute blackness, the lock didn't break. It yielded, a soft, professional click. The door opened with a whisper. "Germaine Desforges," a voice called out, low, gravelly, with the sharp edges of an Italian aristocrat. 32 years old, born in Lyon, the woman who knows where every body in Paris is buried, yet has no one to bury her own. A flashlight beam cut through the dark, pinning her like a specimen. Aridano Quirion stepped into the light. He didn't look at her with anger. He looked at her with the clinical hunger of a man who had just found the missing piece of a puzzle. "You saw a traitor die tonight," he said, stepping closer until she could smell the metallic tang of gunpowder mixed with sandalwood. "And because your father holds the keys to the port of Marseille, I cannot kill you, but I cannot let you walk away." He reached out, his hand gripping her jaw with a possessive strength that wasn't meant to comfort. "This marriage will be a contract, a legal gag. It will mean nothing to my heart, but it will mean everything to your survival." The heavy door of the silver polishing room hadn't been enough, so I ran deeper into the bowels of the estate, my breath hitching in the damp subterranean air of the wine cellar. Here, the glittering gala felt like a fever dream happening to someone else. Thousands of dusty bottles stood in silent judgment behind wrought iron cages, their labels speaking of years I might never see. I pressed into the furthest alcove, the scent of oak and fermenting grapes thick enough to choke on. A soft, rhythmic thud echoed, the sound of Italian leather hitting stone. Aridano didn't rush. He didn't need to. In this labyrinth of vintage wine and older secrets, he was the Minotaur. "The Desforges family," his voice drifted through the aisles, calm and terrifyingly conversational. "For 3 generations you have managed the logistics of the Marseille ports. Your father is a man of rigid principles, Germaine. He refuses to speak with men like me. He considers the Quirion name a stain on the Mediterranean." I pulled a heavy bottle of Bordeaux from the rack, my fingers trembling as I gripped it by the neck like a club. The shadow lengthened across the floor, and then he was there, filling the arched doorway. He looked at the bottle in my hand, a ghost of a smirk pulling at his tight jaw. "A 1945 Mouton Rothschild," he noted, stepping into my personal space until the heat from his body chased away the cellar's chill. "A bit heavy for a bludgeon, don't you think?" "Get away from me," I hissed, though the stone wall was already biting into my shoulder blades. He didn't move back. Instead, he reached out, his hand closing over mine on the neck of the bottle. He didn't wrench it away, he simply held it, forcing me to feel the terrifying strength in his grip. I spent 2 years trying to find a way into those docks. I needed a leverage point, a weakness. He leaned down, his lips inches from my ear, his voice dropping to a jagged whisper. "And then tonight, you fall right into my lap, witness to a murder, daughter of my greatest obstacle, and far more beautiful than the dossiers suggested." He took the bottle from my unresisting fingers and set it aside. From his pocket, he produced a pair of slim, silver restraints. They weren't the heavy steel of the police. They were elegant, almost like jewelry, but the weight of them was absolute. "You have 2 choices, Germain," his thumb grazing the pulse point at my throat, which was fluttering like a trapped bird. "You can walk out of here in these, as a witness I have to dispose of, or you can walk out on my arm as the woman who is going to give me Marseille." The silver cuffs clicked open. The sound was small, but in the silence of the cellar, it sounded like a cage door closing forever. The silence of the wine cellar was absolute, broken only by the frantic, uneven rhythm of my breathing. Arredondo steered me toward a heavy oak tasting table, his hand firm on the small of my back. On the scarred wood sat a single sheet of heavy parchment, its edges gilded in gold, looking more like an ancient decree than a modern legal document. Beside it lay a small, obsidian-handled stiletto, its blade gleaming like a sliver of frozen moonlight. "Sit," he commanded. The word wasn't a suggestion, it was an anchor that pulled me into the high-backed velvet chair. He leaned over me, one hand planted on the table, the other hovering near my shoulder, effectively caging me between his strength and the cold stone of the room. "The terms are simple, Germain. 1 year. You will live in my home, share my name, and appear at my side as my wife. In exchange, the Quirion organization will provide a permanent security detail for your father's estate in Marseille. I will erase the debts your family has accrued trying to fight the port unions, and most importantly," he paused, his gaze dropping to my lips before locking back onto my eyes with a terrifying intensity, "no Russian bullet will ever find you." "A year of my life for a business deal?" I whispered, my voice trembling despite my attempt at concierge-level composure. "And what if I say no?" "Then we return to the silver polishing room, and I let the shadows have what they want," he said, his voice as smooth as the vintage red standing on the racks behind him. "But we both know you're too smart to choose a grave over a palace." He picked up the stiletto. My heart lurched into my throat as he took my right hand. His touch was strangely warm, his thumb tracing the line of my palm with a lingering pressure that felt disturbingly like a caress. With a movement so swift it was almost painless, he pricked the tip of my ring finger. A single bead of crimson welled up, vivid and dark against my skin. "Sign," he murmured, his breath warm against my cheek. "Seal the contract with the only thing that cannot be forged. Give me your year, Germain, and I will give you the world." I looked at the parchment, then at the man who looked like a Renaissance prince and moved like a predator. With a shaking hand, I pressed my bloodied finger to the bottom of the page, leaving a jagged crimson stain where my life used to be. Arredondo watched the mark dry, a look of dark triumph flickering in his winter-cold eyes. The contract was signed. I was no longer a free woman. I was the property of the Quirion crown. The transition from the velvet shadows of the gala to the clinical luxury of Arredondo's private jet happened with a speed that made my head spin. I was ushered through the rain-slicked tarmac of Le Bourget by a phalanx of men in charcoal suits, their presence a silent, impenetrable wall between me and the city I called home. Arredondo walked beside me, his hand resting possessively on the small of my back, a constant reminder of the contract that now sat in the inner pocket of his jacket and the blood that had dried on my finger. The interior of the Gulf Stream was a sanctuary of cream leather and polished walnut, smelling of expensive espresso and the faint, lingering scent of Arredondo's sandalwood cologne. He didn't speak as he gestured for me to sit in one of the oversized captain's chairs. He sat across from me, immediately opening a laptop, the blue light of the screen reflecting in his winter-cold eyes. He looked like a man returning from a routine business trip, not someone who had just erased a woman's life in a wine cellar. As the engines began their low, powerful thrum, I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window. The jet taxied and then surged upward, the G-force pinning me into a seat that felt more like a throne of thorns. Paris shrank beneath us, a sprawling tapestry of amber lights and silver veins. There it was, the Eiffel Tower, a glittering needle of gold piercing the Parisian fog. It looked so small from this height, a toy in a world I no longer belonged to. I thought of my apartment in the Marais, the half-finished book on my nightstand, the client who was expecting me to arrange a private tour of the Louvre tomorrow morning. Someone else would do it. Someone else would live my life. Don't look back, Germaine. Arredondo's voice cut through the hum of the cabin, low and devoid of pity. There is nothing left for you down there but a ghost. Your father's safe, your debts are gone, and your past is a closed book. I watched until the golden glow of the tower flickered and finally vanished into a bank of dark clouds. The city of lights was gone, replaced by the black void of the sky. I wasn't just leaving a city, I was leaving the woman I used to be. The high-end concierge, the master of order, the woman who was never flustered. She had died the moment that blood hit the parchment. Now I was a shadow in Arredondo Quirion's world, a contract bride flying to a destiny I couldn't see, bound to a man who saw my fear as nothing more than a variable to be managed. I closed my eyes, the vibration of the jet rattling my bones, and realized for the first time that I wasn't just a witness or a daughter anymore. I was a Quirion, and the world would never look the same again. The descent into Lake Como was a journey through shifting shadows and silver mist. As the car wound through the narrow serpentine roads of the Italian Alps, the lush greenery seemed to lean in, whispering secrets of the ancient families that had claimed these shores. Finally, the iron gates of Via Corrion swung open, not with a creak, but with the silent, heavy finality of a vault. It was a fortress of pale stone and dark ivy, perched precariously over the deep, still waters of the lake. Arredondo led me through the grand foyer, where the air smelled of beeswax and old power, up to a suite that overlooked the water. The room was breathtaking, filled with sunlight that felt too bright for a woman who had just been stolen from her life. "Your new life requires a new look," Arredondo said, gesturing toward the sprawling walk-in closet. I stepped inside and felt a cold lump form in my throat. Row after row of delicate white lace, silk slips, and ethereal gowns hung like ghosts. There was no color, no structure, just a monochromatic sea of virginal purity and forced innocence. It was a wardrobe designed to make me look soft, pliable, and above all, owned. "The wedding is at sunset," he continued, leaning against the doorframe, his dark suit a sharp contrast to the white expanse. "Maria will assist you. Choose the lace gown with the long sleeves. It suits the image of the Corrion bride." I turned, my jaw tightening as I looked past him at the tailored black pantsuit I had worn from Paris, now wrinkled but still mine. I walked to the nearest rack and pulled a handful of the white silk, feeling the expensive fabric slide through my fingers before I let it drop to the floor in a heap. "I am a concierge, Arredondo. I manage people. I don't get managed by them," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my knees. I won't wear the uniform of a prisoner. I won't play the part of the blushing bride in a dress that symbolizes a purity you've already taken from my life. Aridano's eyes darkened, the winter blue sharpening into something more dangerous and more intrigued. He stepped into the closet, the space suddenly feeling too small for both of us. He reached out, his fingers catching a lock of my hair, his touch lingering with a possessive heat that made my skin prickle. "You think your clothes are your armor, Germaine?" he whispered, his face inches from mine. "You can wear whatever you like, but by the time the sun hits the water, you will still be mine. The lace is just for show, the contract is for real." He turned and walked away, leaving me standing in a room full of white silk, a rebel in a golden cage, realizing that while I could refuse his clothes, I was already wearing his mark. The sun dipped below the jagged peaks of the Alps, bleeding a bruised purple across the surface of Lake Como. Inside the Villa's private chapel, there was no music, no scent of lilies, and no crowd of weeping relatives. The air was thick with the smell of old incense and the cold, metallic reality of a business transaction. I stood before the altar, not in the lace he had chosen, but in a structured cream silk gown I had unearthed from the back of the wardrobe, minimalist, sharp, and utterly devoid of the softness he desired. Aridano waited for me, a silhouette of absolute power against the flickering candlelight. As I reached him, he didn't offer a smile. He didn't even look at my face at first. His eyes swept over my defiant choice of dress with a slow, simmering heat that made the back of my neck prickle. The priest, a man whose eyes remained fixed on the floor as if to avoid witnessing a sin, began the rite in a low, rhythmic Latin. The words felt like stones falling into a deep well. When the time came for the vows, Aridano took my hand. His grip was a vice, warm and unyielding. I spoke the words I had been forced to memorize, my voice steady only because I treated it like a high-stakes negotiation with a difficult client. But when Aridano spoke his, the gravity in his tone made the floor feel like it was tilting. He wasn't just promising to protect me, he was claiming me. "With this ring, you are bound to the Korayan name. My enemies are your enemies. My blood is your blood." The priest pronounced us husband and wife, but there was no celebration. As the man beat a hasty retreat, leaving us alone in the amber glow of the chapel, Aridano stepped into my space. He reached out, his hand sliding up my neck to cup my face, his palm calloused, his fingers splayed across my jaw in a gesture that was half caress, half conquest. He forced me to look up into the winter ice of his eyes, his thumb tracing the trembling line of my lower lip. "Do not mistake the ritual for the reality, Germaine," he whispered, his face vibrating through my skin. "The ring is a shield, and the name is a cage. Do not look for love in this house. You will find protection, you will find wealth, and you will find my obsession. But love is a luxury neither one of us can afford." He leaned down, and for a heartbeat, I thought he would break his own rule. His lips hovered a fraction of an inch from mine, the tension between us a live wire sparking in the dark. Then he pulled away, his expression resetting into the mask of the cold dawn. He turned on his heel, leaving me standing in a room full of white silk, a rebel in a golden cage, realizing that while I could refuse his clothes, I was already wearing his mark. The wedding night did not bring the heat of a honeymoon, but the clinical chill of a high-security ward. Aridano did not follow me into the master suite. He vanished into the shadows of the west wing, his silhouette a sharp, receding line against the marble corridor. I was left alone in a room that was a masterpiece of opulence, silk sheets the color of moonlight, a fireplace that roared with a hollow warmth, and a terrace that looked out over the obsidian expanse of the lake. I paced the perimeter of the room like a caged panther, the heavy diamond on my finger catching the firelight with every step. I was still a concierge at heart, and my first instinct was to map the exits. I didn't expect love, but I hadn't expected to be ignored so completely. It was a tactical error on his part, I thought. He had left the master of logistics alone in a room with a balcony. I moved toward the heavy mahogany door, my hand reaching for the gilded handle. I needed to see how far the golden cage extended, but as my fingers hovered inches from the wood, a soft electronic chime echoed through the silent room. I froze. A small blue LED light, previously invisible against the dark molding, flickered to life. It wasn't a lock, it was a sensor. I stepped back, and the light remained steady, a silent eye watching my every move. I tried the terrace doors next. Another chime, another blue flicker. Every exit was rigged, wired into a system that undoubtedly fed directly to the monitors in Aridano's study. He wasn't just my husband, he was my warden, and he was watching me from the darkness of his office, tracking my pulse through the movement of my shadows. I sat on the edge of the sprawling bed, the silk cold against my skin. I thought of him sitting beneath the glow of his computer screens, analyzing my attempts to flee as if they were nothing more than data points in a trade deal. He had told me not to look for love, but he had neglected to mention that I wouldn't even be allowed the dignity of solitude. The master of order had been outmaneuvered. I stared at the door, realizing that Aridano didn't need to be in the room to possess me. He was in the walls, in the lights, and in the very air I breathed. I lay back against the pillows, my eyes fixed on the blue light of the sensor, waiting for the morning, and wondering if the man who claimed to want no emotion was currently watching me crumble in the dark. The following evening, the villa's dining room felt less like a sanctuary and more like a stage for a psychological war. The table was a vast expanse of mahogany, separated by a candelabra that cast long, flickering shadows between us. I had dressed with intentionality, choosing a gown that felt like armor, my spine straight as I picked at a sea bass that tasted like ash. Aridano sat at the head of the table, his movements fluid and precise, a predator at rest. "The sensors, Aridano," I began, my voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "They're a bit much, even for a man of your reputation. I am a concierge, not a convict. I've spent my life navigating high-security protocols, and I can tell you that treating me like a prisoner only makes me look for the cracks in your walls." He didn't look up from his wine. "The cracks are an illusion, Germain. They exist only to give you something to dream about while you sleep." "I want a renegotiation," I pushed, leaning forward until the candlelight reflected in my eyes. 6 months. Give me 6 months of this protection, and then I return to Paris with my family's safety guaranteed. You've already secured the port ties. Why keep a wife who doesn't want to be held?" "Because the contract was for a year," he said, finally meeting my gaze with a look so cold it felt like a physical weight. The rejection burned, but I had already set another plan in motion. Earlier that afternoon, while walking the terrace, I had lingered near Marco, the youngest member of his security detail. I had used every trick in my professional arsenal: a tilt of the head, a lingering gaze, a soft laugh that suggested a shared secret. I had seen him flush, seen his eyes dart toward the cameras, and I knew I had found a crack. "Perhaps your men are more reasonable than you," I murmured, watching Aridano's jaw tighten. "Marco, for instance, he seemed quite concerned about my comfort today. He even mentioned the shift changes at the south gate. It's amazing what people will tell you when you show them a little kindness." The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The temperature didn't just drop, it vanished. Aridano stood, the chair screeching against the marble floor like a dying animal. In 3 strides he was around the table, his hand slamming onto the wood beside my plate. He leaned down, his face inches from mine, his eyes a swirling storm of winter ice and raw, unfiltered possessiveness. "Do not play games with my men, Germain," he hissed, his voice vibrating with a dangerous low-frequency rage I hadn't seen before. You think flirting is a tool? In this house, it is a spark in a powder keg. If you ever look at him or any other man that way again, I won't just tighten the sensors. I will ensure you forget what the outside world even looks like." He gripped my chin, forcing me to see the raw loss of control behind his mask. "You are not a concierge tonight. You are my wife, and you will learn the difference, even if I have to break you to do it." The moon was a sliver of bone behind the alpine clouds, casting the gardens of Villa Quirion into a world of silver and ink. I had spent hours timing the sweeps of the security lights, mapping the blind spots with the cold, calculated precision of the concierge I used to be. The sensors on my door had been bypassed with a simple short-circuit trick I'd learned from a disgruntled tech mogul in Paris. I was a ghost moving through the shadows, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs as I reached the stone stairs leading down to the private docks. The smell of the lake, cold, deep, and ancient, rushed up to meet me. I could see the silhouette of the speedboat, the keys I'd lifted from the hallway console heavy in my pocket. Freedom was 100 yards away. It was a dark, rippling expanse that promised to return me to a world where my name belonged to me, and blood didn't seal contracts. I was halfway down the final flight of stairs when the floodlights erupted, blinding me with a white, artificial noon. "Running, Germaine?" The voice didn't come from the house. It came from the darkness of the dock itself. Aridano stepped into the light, his silk shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his hair disheveled by the wind. He didn't look like the composed Don who had sat at the head of the dining table. He looked unraveled. He looked dangerous. I didn't stop. I lunged for the boat, but he was faster, a blur of kinetic fury. He caught my arm, spinning me around and pinning me against the cold stone of the retaining wall. The impact knocked the breath from my lungs, but the look in his eyes was more suffocating than the blow. The winter blue was gone, replaced by a dark, terrifying heat. His hands moved to my shoulders, his grip so tight I knew there would be bruises in the shape of his obsession by morning. "You think I'll just let you go?" he roared, the sound echoing off the cliffs and across the water. "You think you can just walk out of this life and leave me here?" "It was a contract, Aridano," I screamed back, my own mask finally cracking. "You said it meant nothing." I lied. He shoved his face close to mine, his breath ragged, his jaw trembling with a raw, jagged emotion that felt like an earthquake. "I've spent my life controlling every variable, every port, every bullet, but the thought of you on that boat, the thought of waking up in that house and not seeing your defiance, it makes me feel insane. It makes me want to burn the world down just to keep you in the ashes." He didn't kiss me, he simply held me there, his forehead pressed against mine, his entire body shaking as the mask of the Mafia boss shattered completely. In that moment, I realized the sensors weren't just to keep me in, they were to keep him sane, and I had never been more terrified or more alive. The walk back to the villa was a funeral procession for the lie we had been living. Aridano's grip on my arm never wavered, his fingers a brand of heat through the silk of my sleeve. He led me not to my room, but to his private study, the heart of the fortress. The fire was dying in the hearth, a heap of glowing embers that cast a hellish red light across the dark wood and leather. He didn't sit. He moved to the sideboard, his hands shaking so violently that the crystal decanter rattled against the glass. He downed the amber liquid in one swallow and turned to face me, his silhouette jagged against the fading light. "You want to know about the port, Germaine?" he began, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that seemed to vibrate from the floorboards. You want to know about the strategic necessity of the Deforge name? He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out the parchment, the contract, the page I had stained with my own blood in a dark cellar in Paris. He held it up, the gold edges mocking the raw, primal energy vibrating between us. "There are a dozen ways to take a port," he hissed, stepping into my space until I could feel the frantic heat radiating from his chest. "I have enough leverage to crush your father's business without ever uttering your name. I have enough blood on my hands to buy every dock from Marseille to Nice." He moved to the hearth, and, with a flick of his wrist, he tossed the contract into the embers. I gasped, watching as the parchment curled, the fire licking at the signature written in my own DNA. In seconds, the legal shield, the business deal, and the 1-year limit turned to gray ash. "The marriage was never about the port," he whispered, turning back to me with an expression of such terrifying vulnerability that I stepped back. The cold dawn was gone. In his place was a man unmade by his own obsession. "You can't leave, Germain. Not in 6 months, not in a year." His voice broke, a jagged sound in the silence of the villa. "I won't let you go. I have burned the only thing that gave you an exit. You aren't my wife by contract anymore. You are mine because I'm too far gone to exist in a world where you are free." As he leaned down, his lips finally crashing against mine, I realized the true danger wasn't the Mafia or the Russians. It was the man who had destroyed his own empire just to ensure I stayed within the ruins. The golden gates of Lake Como became my permanent horizon. Ariano no longer spoke of contracts, only of forever. In the heat of his gaze, I realized the concierge had finally met a chaos she couldn't manage, a beautiful, dark obsession that made my cage feel like the only world worth having. Paris is a ghost, but Lake Como has become my reality. Ariano no longer watches me through sensors, but with a raw, terrifying devotion that defies the contract he burned. I am no longer a concierge of the elite. I am the heartbeat of a king who chose obsession over control.